Shifting. All right, let me know when. I'll be quiet for 5 seconds. Oh. Just, you got to wave to the internet. Okay, so I can begin? All right, hi. The talk that we're going to be doing today is your point of sale system has got to go. And first of all, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mick Douglas. You can follow me on Twitter at BetterSafetyNet. I don't tweet as much as I should, but I do read the Twitters, and it's a nice way of staying on top of tech. And as Dave, the prior speaker, alluded to, normally I talk about how cool the blue team is and how nice it is to defend, but today I'm all red. And just to give you an idea of how red I am, I got Dave's cell phone. So if anybody wants to do some pranks, we'll do this for the highest bidder. You want a new phone? Okay, so Dave will probably be coming back in, and when he does, make sure. Yeah, I know. I turned it off when it started dialing. That's why it went straight to voicemail. So we can auction it off. We might do this as an auction for Notacon, Dave's cell phone. So anyway, this is just to give you an idea of the headspace that I'm operating in today. I'm very red team. And before I begin officially, I've got a disclaimer here. I'm talking as a private individual. I work for a day job. This has nothing to do with my current employer. This has nothing to do with any of my prior employers. I'm not speaking on behalf of my dog Mojo or the President of the United States or anyone in between. This is just me talking, saying, hey, here's some stuff I did. I think it's fun. I think it's neat. All the research that I did was with either devices that I owned outright. So I went and bought these, or I had written permission. So as far as I know, I did everything ethically and legally that way. And, you know, I've tried to get everything correct. If you guys know of any mistakes, just make sure you call it out, because I'm just trying to share what I know. So, again, I'm only speaking on my behalf, and the only reason I'm being so strident about this is where I work can be kind of touchy about that. So, a bit about this talk. If you're anything like a typical American, you've already interacted with point-of-sale systems today, maybe even a couple times today. You might have seen something that's more modern like this guy, or you may have dealt with one of these older models, something like this. But the takeaway is that by default, the security on these things is kind of good in some areas, and in some areas it's actually like really beautiful. But in other areas, it's like OMG, WTF, barbecue sauce, horrible. And when I, hey Dave, how you doing? Yeah, I did. Yeah, so today we're talking all red team stuff, so I figured I might as well live up to it. I love you. Here you go. You son of a bitch. Wow. Not only, folks, you saw it here, not only is Dave a dynamic speaker, but he's actually a power source. That's why we had that feedback. Wow. That explains why you're able to type and talk so fast. All right, so, yeah, we're just going to be kind of exploring and playing around a little bit with these devices. And I've only got one demo, and I thought that it might be neat to kick things off and show the demo right at the front. So now, fingers crossed, such that the demo gods aren't mean to me. But what I'm taking is just a standard Ingenico PED. This is a pin entry device, is what the PED stands for. And what I'm doing is I'm connecting it to my cash register, which is just this PC here. And I'm going to drop out of the prezo here. And then I'm going to duplicate my displays. Hopefully the resolution is nice and low. All right, so now imagine instead of just a normal Windows desktop, we're running the point of sale application. And what I've done to this device is actually a very cruel and unusual thing. I've done some hardware hacking. You as a teller are not going to be able to tell. It looks, feels, and acts just as if it were a regular point-of-sale device. You as the consumer, same way, you're not going to know. But yet, when I attach it to my handy-dandy virtual cash register, you're going to see something that happens. And this takes a few moments for it to boot, so we'll just have to dance a little bit. Hey, Internet, how you doing? And it should be soon. Okay, starting to see some status stuff moving. Takes a few moments. And fingers crossed, there we go. It's starting to do key presses on our behalf. And so now you're saying, hey, this is only a demo. This could have been an actual exploit. Can your retailer defend against this? Yes, no, or cry? Now, the funny thing about this is when I did this work, started getting into this space, a lot of people were like, oh, cool story, bro. You're doing this against Windows. We've got Linux or this weird embedded system. And I'm like, I don't care. It's keystrokes. And they're like, well, the antivirus. And I'm like, no, you're not paying attention. Keystrokes. I can emulate whatever I want on this bus. And I'll show you what I mean about the bus. Point-of-sale systems actually have their own data channel. And you can play with it and do some really ugly things. So let's, whoops. Hold on. Computers are hard. Hey, I'm just glad the demo worked. It's all gravy from here. All right. So, demo worked. So what happened? What I had done in this case is I had actually embedded a teensy device inside of here. And that's how I'm able to emulate these keystrokes. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Now, I want to mention that for those of you who don't know me, I have a reputation of having a very starchy white hat, and that I try to be a good guy as best as I can. And in this case, I really did my best. I tried to notify the vendors and do this, and they're still kind of vulnerable-ish, but I've sat on this so long, all the NDAs for the work that I initially started doing on this has aged out, and it's time to start getting the word out. This is the first time this talk is being given and recorded. Again, hey, Internet. And I want to get the word out that there's a lot of problems with point-of-sale systems. So now, when you start getting into and doing research on these devices, you'll hear a couple different acronyms. Point-of-sale, that does not stand for POS, the other meaning, although you might think that at sometimes. Or the more correct term is POI, point of interaction. And these are the systems that you work with anytime you're dealing with retail. Hospital systems use them. I've also seen them in some banking industries. And what you have here is there's some kind of controller device, and it's talking some protocol, either serial or USB, to any number of these items. Well, guess what? This bus trusts the ever-loving snot out of every one of these items. The idea of an attacker being in that bus just does not even compute. In fact, when I had one of the talks with one of the vendors, I said, hey, you know, I weaponized this thing. And they were like, why? Why would you do that? That's not nice. And I was like, hi, I'm Mick. I do not nice things from time to time. So this is a very ripe attack surface area, okay? Again, as I said, oh, yeah. So I've got two different point-of-sale systems. After the talk, I'll pass them around and show you guys. There's some pretty interesting things to point out about them from a physical standpoint. Older platforms typically use a serial protocol like RS-232 or RS-422. And they have either serial connectors or some sort of proprietary connector. You can do these sorts of attacks that I'm going to show you. It's just a little trickier and takes a little testing, but it works. USB is an option too, and this is what most modern, and I'm going to use air quotes here because some of these devices are actually really quite long in the tooth because retailers are cheap. And that's not because they're like being just stingy with money, it's that they've got really thin margins. And so they can't have like a 3-year refresh like we do on our desktops at work. they've got something like 10-year refreshes, if that. So, you know, you're going to see some really ancient technology out there. Now, this is the boot load for this particular device. And the thing I want to point out here is that this is a USB HID. What's an HID? Yeah, human interface device. Seriously? This is just a glorified keyboard? Well, hey, guess what? Rubber duck attacks work. Teensy device attacks work. Any number of attacks work. You don't have to be like, you know, a freaking ninja to do some fun stuff with these devices. So the big reason that I'm able to do this type of an attack is service panels. All of these devices have these things that are called service panels. On this one, this modern one, it looks like what's a battery pack. Batteries don't go in here. It's actually, it's kind of tight tolerances, it's actually a bay that allows field techs to interface with items in here. Now, if you look at this, and I'll pass this around, you'll actually see that there's a micro SD card slot. Thank you. Thank you. Because really, all you have to do is make a weaponized firmware, and you can boot into it, and it just does its bidding. And oh, by the way, those firmwares and the API for them, published. Hey, so you can do some really crazy stuff. Now, here's the idea. Now, do you do any hardware hacking? Just sorry to put you on the spot. Yeah. Okay, you do a little hardware hacking. How much space do you think that is to work with? Okay, so the answer was a lot. So get ready for scary. This is the, sorry to be crunching on the mic. This is the service panel for the ones that you're going to see at most retailers. This is gargantuan. I feel like you could drive a small car in here. And the thing that's beautiful is that my attack platform was all tucked inside here. And I'll show you how to make your own attack platform. And if you want to be fancy, if you want to really cram a lot of stuff in here, you can use a Dremel and cut off all the spikes, and it's great. And if you look in here, you'll see like a host serial connector, an aux RJ45, and oh yeah, like here, these look a little bit like JTAG type connectors. I mean, man, the stuff that you can do on this is awesome and endless. I had a whole lot of fun doing this hacking. Just can't get enough of it. So you're probably thinking like, whack, this is really bad. And the answer is yes, it is really bad. It's horrible. These devices are very problematic in that the systems are designed such that these individual components are trusted. Nobody's going to hack them, so that's a problem. But then there's also plenty of surface area for us to put and cram all sorts of other stuff. So it's like a perfect storm. But wait, there's more. So here's the, and by the way, rest in peace, Billy. You gave us so many lulls. We love you. The problem is that terminals talk with one another. And what I mean by that is when you go to your big box retailer or whoever, any company where they have multiple checkout lanes, the terminals talk with one another. They just do. So what does this mean? We've got network terminals. Yay! This is cool. So now if you think about this, ponder how that shop, how the network is laid out. What sort of network topology do they have? Well, it's flat. It's really flat. All the terminals can talk to one another. All the machines in that shop can talk to one another. I've yet, in my research or in my pen tests that I've done for various clients over the years, I have yet to see somebody have any sort of network segmentation. It just doesn't happen. And so you might be thinking, okay, flat network, you know, that might make sense because what happens if one terminal goes down and it's still able to do swipes, but it's not able to send processing? We can route it through to another aisle that's maybe closed, and we can have that going and nobody's the wiser. What about store-to-store networks? Guess what? Again, we've seen this guy. Store-to-store networks are flat. That means whether you're in one store or another, you can see all the nodes inside the networks. That's a big, big problem. But yet it gets worse when you talk about merchant clearinghouse networks. So who can talk with the merchant clearinghouse? Everybody. It's flat again. Do you see a trend? What you got is a network topology that's flatter than a table. And for an attacker, this is great because all I need, one box, I've got access to the entire network. You don't even have to pivot. Hey, it's pretty nice. Now, in every instance, when I've gone to retailers and said, hey, did you know your network's really flat? They said, yeah, this is good. This is good because in the event that things fail over, we can reroute this. It allows for, and this is a quote from a client who will remain nameless, robust resilience. In this client's, the one who said this, they actually had a case of where they were pushing a patch to the point-of-sale devices in their network, and the package was wrong. It caused an error that would prevent it from sending out outbound communication. And so, directly to the merchant, but they could talk with one another. It was an odd network stack config issue mistake that the package managers made. But what they actually wound up doing is they just rerouted traffic, and they actually had a 5-state region all routed through one particular cash register that for whatever reason didn't get that update. Now, I don't know about you, but that does not strike me as robust resilience. To me, that's a whole lot of this. That's a lot of fail, right? You know, and like, so I was trying to be really nice to the client, but in my head, I'm like, boy, if only they made things like failover circuits or VLANs or, you know, God forbid, point-to-point VPN technologies, you know? There's so many things that you could do to avoid this, but the takeaway here, retail networks are horrible. They just don't have the money, they don't have the funding or what have you to build what we would consider a modern network. Now, my challenge to you is go and help them. If you ever get a client that does retail type stuff, try and show them how you can make their networks better, how you can make them more resilient. Because it's really, really problematic. So, any questions so far of what I've been talking about? No? All right, well, we'll keep on rolling. So, here's the deal. I'm not doing this talk to beat up on anyone or, you know, like rub your nose in it or whatever, but we need to talk about where things went wrong so that we can make them better. Now, the first problem is the actual PCI DSS. So, show of hands here, how many people have heard of PCI DSS? All right, everybody's hands up. All right, now show of hands. Can anyone name another PCI standard that's not the DSS? Oh. What? PAD, yeah. Oh, wait, you got the internet up. Hey, you know what? Give me that phone again. Yeah, give me that phone again, Dave. So there are other standards, and these other standards actually govern how these systems and these devices should be set up and configured. Now, you're probably not going to be dealing so much with the PED standards unless you're actually manufacturing them, but it is really neat to know that there is a standard for how they should be built. If you're pen testing these types of environments, wouldn't you want to check to see if they're conforming with those standards? Yeah. Check them out. It makes a real nice hit list for how to attack these systems. So make sure that, you know, when you're doing a PCI assessment or if you're an auditor, don't just do PCI DSS. Look at the other appropriate standards. The other problem is that all the focus has been on the actual devices, the endpoints. So, story time. Bunches, I'm not going to say how long ago, but bunches of years ago, I was on a pen test, and there was, while we were getting spun up to do a PCI pen test, the Michaels Arts and Crafts breach happened. And what had happened was this organized crime group had deployed weaponized pin entry devices at different Michaels Arts and Crafts stores. And the particular client of ours was like, hey, are we vulnerable to this? And I said, well, probably, because the vendor hasn't had a chance to even respond. And they were like, well, let's find out. So go attack these devices and see what you can do. And so, you know, while trying to figure out what we can do, like different firmware attacks, bus attacks, any sort of things like that, we started like fleshing out, here's our, you know, attack plan and here's what we're going to do. We started running through them, showing the scenarios, and it was a fun time. Now, one thing I want to point out is a lot of companies will say it's really hard to attack these sorts of devices. And it is if you attack them as they're expecting you to attack. If you do something a little sideways, these things tip over real easy. So one thing that you may not be aware of, if you've not worked with these devices in the past, is they have tamper technologies. They will detect if you're doing things to them. So for instance, they have a thing in there that I like to call key killer. I don't know what the appropriate actual term is, but if you trigger a particular series of events, they will actually wipe the cryptographic keys on them, and these devices brick themselves. They can no longer be used for swipe, and they actually have to be returned to the vendor for service, where they'll reflash them and put in the appropriate keys. So if you're experimenting with these, or if you ever buy something off of eBay, be mindful that you might trip this, and then you've got yourself a nice electronic door jam. So if you attack them directly, you can trip this. One such one that's well known and well published are these locks. And if you were to remove the panel and remove the pins or the number pads rather, on these devices, you'll see a circuit board that looks something like this. This is actually the brother of the larger gray one, the older one. What these pads are, these are the contact points for the number pads themselves. But you will see a variety of ones named like lock 1, and there's another lock over here. What happens is if this circuit is ever broken, there's enough of a capacitor charge that it will wipe the key out of it. So you have to be very careful in dealing with this. There are organized crime units who have fiber optic cameras, and they'll snake a voltage probe down in there, and they will do like voltage attacks where they will like voltage bend the circuits and try all kinds of shenanigans. That's very tough and tedious. I tried it. I'm not that good at it. Yeah, be mindful of this is an attack surface. Another thing that's interesting is these devices actually can tell whether or not they were turned off incorrectly and whether or not they were disconnected from its terminal correctly. And if you do that, like just yank it, like say you want to like do this sort of an attack and you don't want to mess with like doing the normal shutdown, or maybe, God forbid, you're doing like a smash and grab and you're just going to steal one of these devices. When you next plug it in and turn it on, you're going to see something like this. Hardware attack detected, and then there's some kind of a status code. This status code is just for the field techs. This thing won't work, it powers on, until you do a reset. Now, in this case, oh no's, we're busted. This device is, off limits, unless you know a special key sequence. They have special key sequences that you can do, much like we do Control-Alt-Delete. They're reprogrammable. Guess how many people reprogram them? No one. I've yet to see anybody reprogram. So there's default key sequences. The default key sequence is usually depending on the make and model. So there's different like Vulcan neck pinch type maneuvers that you got to do to get them to go into their diagnostic panel. And then once you, no, I'm not going to share, but Google will. Once you do that neck pinch type thing, you will get to a diagnostic panel screen. There's a couple different sub-menus that you got to go through, but eventually you get to one here, the hardware attack menu, and there's an option for clear attack flag. All you do is move it down to that one and hit the green enter button. It takes a few moments, and then this will gray out, like it'll just like fade out. You just move it to reboot, hit enter, and it'll take a moment to boot up, much like how the attack that I showed you a few minutes ago took a few minutes. But instead of an attack launching, it'll just be back to normal. So, oops, that's a fail, because if we've got something that people have physical access to, is it a good idea to have people be able to physically, simply reset it? No, that's crazy talk. But yet we're here. And I don't know what else to say about it. Another problem is cables. So it's funny in that things like the API and how the firmware works on these devices are covered rather in depth, but there's not a whole lot discussed about cables. In fact, posing as a field technician, I got on one of their forums, and they said, well, we really can't give you information on how the cables work. It's proprietary for secrecy. And I was like, man, that stinks. I guess I'm not going to do any cable attacks. Well, for this one client, they were having me do a firmware attack, and they had customized the firmware, so good on them. And they had done such a good job that I was really at a complete loss. And so I was in super sleep deprivation mode, sleep dep. How many people doing pen tests have gotten into sleep dep mode, and you can't even think straight, but you gotta win, right? It's I gotta get this box, because God forbid you ever write that report, hey guys, you did great, couldn't get anything. You don't want that. So in my sleep-addled state, I was getting more and more frustrated, and I finally decided, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna reverse engineer the cables. And so, you know what I did is I got out my reverse cable engineering tool. And you all should have one of these. It looks like this. And what you do is you get ready to cut the cable, and you remind yourself that these cables cost anywhere between $70 and $125 each, because they're made specifically by the vendor. And you cut them open, and you see this. And you think, what? That's it? Yeah. Using a voltage probe, I was able to see this is power, and these, I even knew right off the bat, just based off of the colors, that it was, white, black, red, and green, that's standard USB, and I was like, holy cow, it's not that easy, is it? Yeah, it is. It's that easy. Now, make fun of this next slide all you want. It worked, and it worked beautifully, and I've got a nicer version that I stuffed in that machine earlier, but this was my first proof of concept of a USB cable attack. So what I did here is I just said, well, hey, here's the power. So, hey, guess what? Power's just going to slide on by. And your point of sale system would be right over here. And then I simply went out and bought the smallest USB hub that I could find. And I found the smallest USB stick that was large. I actually have it here. During one of the pen tests, I got into a real tight situation, so I actually made it so that you can remove that little blue plastic bit, save even a little more space. This, by the way, is a 32 gig system, and you would not believe how many credit card information, how much card swipe you can get with that and put in there. And then this, of course, is a Teensy. This is, I'm kind of dating this research, but this was a Teensy 2.0. And what
you're doing, I mean, the 3 is probably overkill.
Well, yeah, for what I'm doing, 3 is overkill. I might even use something like the DigiKey or Tiny Circuits for the next time I need to do this. They're even smaller, but they're really neat. And what's really sick about this attack is because it's a USB splice into the host, it just works. I mean, I have not yet come across a single operating system that goes, I don't know what a USB hub is. That just doesn't happen. And I have, for those of you who are like, well, what about Serial? Serial still works. It's a little tricky. I didn't make a Serial hub. Such a device does exist. You can make one. But I went even lower tech, and I just spliced it in so that it would stomp over top of the transactions. So it would send the key commands on the same channel that it would for the swipe data, which it's not as elegant, but it'll work. Fingers, air quote. Now, in an ideal world, we would have secure communications between hardened systems. Clearly, that's not taking place here. What's actually, if you think about SSL or TLS, we've got secure communications between relatively weak systems. It's easy-ish to break into these systems. It's much harder to break a well-formed SSL. Now, in point-of-sale systems, or POI, we've got weak communications between relatively strong systems. So what we're at is a situation that's the opposite of SSL. This is bad. There's a lot of opportunity for improvement here. Another item to talk about is that defending once somebody has physical access to the asset, holy cow, things are hard. And I always kind of knew it, but the talk that I saw at last year's DerbyCon that really took it home for me was this talk. I know Dave was there. Was anybody else there to see Jeff Papio's talk? That one made you so mad. And I remember you were only a couple seats behind me, and you said, that's the same model as my gun safe. For those of you who didn't see it or haven't watched the YouTube video yet, Jeff Papio, a big shout out to him. He's another guy in the 614 hackers group. Hey, Jeff, love ya. He found out, he did some research, and he found that you can simply rock a safe and like bump it, and it causes the solenoid pin to drop, and then the door just opens. And it's literally that easy. And you're like, no, yes, it's that easy. And so Jeff's talk taught me, if you've got physical access, you're getting in. And so defending against things is tricky, but it's not hard, and it doesn't have to be expensive. The way to protect against Jeff's attack, does anybody remember what all he said you had to do? Have the safe bolted down. That's not that expensive. Well, hey, same thing with these devices. All of these point-of-sale systems should be mounted to a bracket in a secure way. Ironically enough, Target does probably the best job of all the big box retailers. It wasn't their point-of-sale systems that was compromised. Hey, Target guys, I'm sorry you're having such a rough year. Have a beer. You're well due. But, you know, it doesn't have to be expensive to defend against this. You can go to a hardware store, any hardware store on the planet, and for under $4 buy security screws. Do you know what screw everybody else uses on the planet? Phillips number 2. You just use a standard screwdriver and you're into their point-of-sale systems. It's horrible. Another thing that is super cheap that I wish people used a lot more is tamper tape. I've yet to see well, no, I'm lying. There was one that used it, but it was actually kind of inadvertent. What they used was a real thin silver tape that the service techs had their tag ID on it, and it was just to say that so-and-so worked here. It wasn't really like a security thing, and it just happened to be that the only way to reasonably stick that on that wasn't too obvious was on the side, relatively, like, such that it overlapped and it would have shown that it was open. So get this stuff. I mean, you can buy whole bales for it for relatively cheap. Another thing that I highly, highly recommend is that you teach everyone in your organization who's using these devices anti-social engineering techniques. I've been doing this now for a couple years, and I've got a perfect track record so far. Now, I'm sure Murphy's going to strike me down for being cocky about it, but I've never yet been challenged. And all I need to do in order to get access is say, hi, I hear your point of sale's acting up. How can I help? Or, hey, I hear that it's running slow. How can it help? Now, one of the things that I do to help make it a little more convincing is I go to Zazzle.com and I make myself an Ingenico shirt. And I say, look, hey, I'm the same provider as your shirt. Hey, this shirt, or your point of sale system. And so, you know, Zazzle, love you. Keep up the good work, guys. So, now, you're probably thinking, wow, we're totally doomed. That's not true. We can do defense. For starters, the best thing that you can do is have strong baselines for your hardware. There is no reason that you cannot detect a new human input device connecting to your terminal. You should see that I've done a USB hub on that terminal. You should see that I've got another USB stick or removable drive attached to that terminal. And yet, I've never had anybody catch me because these systems aren't expecting to have these things connected in. For the love of God, segment your network. This is something that security people have known about for a real long time. How many people here are networking folks? A couple hands up. How hard is it to do network segmentation? Not tough. It really isn't that rough. There's no reason, in my opinion, no sane reason, that a terminal that fails over should go to another terminal. Why can't you have like a failover device in the manager's office or wherever your equipment locker is? I mean, there's plenty of things you can do to segment your network. You got to do it. That's the number one takeaway, actually, because once you're in a retail network, it's lights out. As far as defending yourself as customers, after seeing this talk, I don't want you to be like, yeah, I'll pay plastic, and then you're like looking around at how's this device, you're not going to be able to tell if somebody tampered. That's the whole point of these attacks. You just can't see. So all I would say is just kind of watch your credit. I've had my credit stolen 4 times. I've lived. It's not fun, but, it just happens. It's kind of like the cost of living in the modern world. So that's all I got. Thank you so very much. I want to thank Notacon. It's been fun talking all these different Notacons. Guys, please I'd love to have Notacon keep going. I appreciate podcasters, Sands, and I also want to appreciate my missus. Babe, you put up with way too much crap. Sorry. No, Dave, you're not the one I'm talking about. In fact, I would have to say if my missus versus you went in the Thunderdome, my money's on Heather. So before I go and open it up to answer questions and answers, if you're looking for a gig and you're in Central Ohio or willing to move there, please come see me. The company that I'm working for, which will remain nameless in this presentation, we're hiring. We're hiring all sorts of folks. So here's my contact info once again, and any questions? Yeah? So the question was, part of the issues with Target was that there was unencrypted data between the swipe device and the cash register. Technically, that should not be happening. However, I have seen, depending on how the networks are configured, I have seen everything in between. So I've seen encrypted from swipe machine to the point of sale PC, and then it gets put into clear text into memory, because it has to be worked. And so I've had to extract memory out of the terminal, and then it gets sent on secure. But more often than not, what I'll see is it usually, at least in modern ones, the swipe device to the PC, the terminal, is encrypted, but then for some reason, the communication from the terminal to the manager's office or the last hop from the store is in the clear. So I've seen it different ways. It's not supposed to be that way, but I have seen it. Yeah?
Is it defaulted that it will encrypt it from
Oh, so the question is it default that it will encrypt it? It's my understanding that it has to be set up on a per system basis. If you buy a turnkey solution, I've only seen one turnkey solution not have it. And by turnkey, I mean one where it's got the PC, the application on it already installed, and all the devices. In those instances, it's usually secured. I've only seen one where they didn't have it set up to do the encryption. But when you do it where it's like kind of a roll your own, that's where I usually see them starting to go more down the fail path of having it be clear text. Yeah, good question. Yeah? So the question is, do near-field or RFID devices have similar issues? I've seen it, so yes and no. Most near-field devices, you're not going to have enough room to stick like the Tinsy type stuff to have that attack. But I have, in one instance, they had it snake underneath the counter. So it was I won't say who, but it was a coffee store that had a few chains. And the near-field device actually was bolted to the counter, and then the cable went up or down through the counter, and you could do that and stuff that. In fact, you didn't even have to. You could put a whole freaking PC under that counter, and they never would have known, really. So, yes-ish. I mean, part of the problem for these style of attacks is that people are not detecting when hardware that is not authorized is being attached to it. Any other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned that there seems to be a low budget in this environment. So what are you recommending in that, from that point of view?
Yeah.
How are we going to make all the changes?
Okay, so the question/comment is, earlier I had mentioned that there's a relatively low budget available for these devices, and what can you do to defend against these sorts of attacks? Let me slide back here. So security screws, super cheap. If you have to do a little more work for the bad guy to get them off the mount, it will become obvious. You know, if I'm trying to do, like if I social engineer my way in and I walk up and I've got my trusty number 2 Phillips screwdriver and it's a star like this, like I'm going to look, like they're going to be like, yo, what's up? How do you not know? And I'll just be like, bye, you know, and have to dip out of there. So something like this actually does offer valuable protections. The other thing you can do is there are ways in Windows to say, here's the only hardware that I should be expecting connected to me. If I see anything else connect, any different USB IDs connecting, send an alert or disable it. There are some products out there that allow you to lock down which device IDs will be permitted to connect in. So, yep. And then, for the love of God, get tamper tape. That makes the forensic side of it a lot easier. You can just real quick look at it and say, oh, hey, somebody has opened this device. And they should go years and years. I mean, these embedded systems are designed to literally go years and years without ever having to need to be serviced. And so if you ever see this, you should start your incident response process. So I don't think that these things are really expensive in terms of cost per se. It just takes a few little extra cycles and a little awareness. Does that answer your question?
I think so. But
Okay.
some of the attacks come in from the web server side of it, such as Target.
Yeah.
What would you recommend there?
Well, so whether or not it's like what happened with Target, so the question is, again, there's still such a budgetary constraint. Like, what are some things that they can do meaningfully to harden their systems? And whether it's like what happened with Target and I forget which DIY home improvement. I think it might have been Home Depot. It might have been Lowe's. Lowe's and Home Depot lawyers, keep your shirts on, relax. I forget which one of them it was, where somebody was able to connect into their Wi-Fi and do all kinds of shenanigans. The big thing is segment your network, do your alerting. And the good thing about these networks, again, for big box retail networks versus, say, a corporate network, is that these networks are really, really simple. Because as far as devices go, you have a point-of-sale system, you're going to have some building automation type stuff, some manager type system, maybe your time system, and that's it. You might have multiple, or hopefully you'll have multiple point-of-sale systems, but you should be able to solve that. I wish I worked in an environment where I had that few of a profile. And then the cool thing is, once you solve how a particular store's traffic works and looks, they're cookie cutter. or at least they should be. So the myth that, it's expensive and hard, in my opinion, I don't buy it all that much. I mean, really all you're doing is solving one problem, solve it well, and then wash, rinse, repeat for each store. Any other questions? Cool. Well, thanks. It was real fun. And I'll have these devices. If you got any questions or want to come work with us, let me know. And bye-bye, Internet. Okay. Yeah, I know. So I just like this picture. I like the fall a lot. I used to say winter was my favorite season until this last one, and then I was like, no thank you, winter.